Have you ever stood at the edge of something important, a new career, a creative project, a relationship, a dream you've held for years, and heard that voice? You know the one. It whispers that you're not good enough, that you'll fail, that everyone will see through you, that you should just stay where it's safe. That voice has killed more dreams than failure ever could. It's the voice of self-doubt, and it's destroying your life one whispered lie at a time. I know this voice intimately. Not because I've conquered it completely, but because I've learned to recognize it for what it truly is, an ancient survival mechanism that's outlived its usefulness. A guard dog that attacks its own master. Today, I'm going to share with you a Japanese philosophical framework that doesn't just manage self-doubt, but transforms it into the very fuel that powers your greatest achievements. This isn't another motivational speech that leaves you pumped for 48 hours before reality crashes back in. This is a complete rewiring of how you relate to the voice in your head. And I need to warn you, what I'm about to teach goes against everything Western self-help culture tells you about confidence, positive thinking, and believing in yourself. It requires you to do something that will feel completely backwards at first. So backwards that you'll question whether it can possibly work. But before we begin, I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment below with the one dream or goal that self-doubt has been whispering you can't achieve. I read every single comment, and your willingness to name your doubt publicly is the first step in stripping it of its power. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Man Who Couldn't Speak. Let me tell you about a man named David. David was 34 years old and worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. He was brilliant, his code was elegant, his solutions were innovative, and his colleagues often turned to him for help with complex problems. But David had a secret that was slowly suffocating him. He couldn't speak in meetings. Not physically. His vocal cords worked fine. But every time his manager asked for input, every time there was an opportunity to present his ideas, every time he could have advocated for himself, that voice would start. They'll think you're stupid. You'll stumble over your words. Someone else said something similar and said it better. Just stay quiet. You're safer being invisible. For 7 years, David had watched less talented engineers get promoted while he stayed in the same position. Not because he wasn't capable, but because leadership couldn't see his capabilities through his silence. His ideas ended up in other people's presentations. His solutions were implemented without his name attached. He had become a ghost in his own life. His wife noticed it too. At dinner parties, he would shrink into corners. When friends asked his opinion, he'd defer to others. She watched the man she married slowly disappear, replaced by a shadow who was terrified of taking up space in the world. The breaking point came during his annual review. His manager said, "David, your technical skills are outstanding, but we need to see more leadership presence from you. We need you to speak up, to own your ideas. Until we see that, I can't recommend you for advancement." That night, David sat in his car in the parking garage for an hour, unable to drive home. He wasn't just stuck in his career. He was stuck in his own head, trapped behind walls built by his own thoughts. He thought about his father, who had always called him too sensitive, who had mocked him when he expressed uncertainty. He thought about the teacher in 5th grade who had humiliated him in front of the class when he gave the wrong answer. He thought about every moment his voice had been dismissed, shut down, or ridiculed. And he realized something terrifying. He had become his own prison guard. The people who had silenced him years ago were gone, but he kept doing their work for them every single day. His wife found him still sitting in the car when she came down to check on him 2 hours later. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "You need help, David. Real help." The next morning, he searched for therapists specializing in social anxiety. But one name kept appearing in forms and recommendations: not a therapist, but someone called a mindset architect. A Japanese consultant named Kenji Nakamura who worked with high performers struggling with self-sabotage. David was skeptical. He'd read all the self-help books. The Power of Positive Thinking. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Atomic Habits. They all said the same thing: change your thoughts, believe in yourself, build confidence through small wins. He'd tried it all. Nothing stuck. But he was desperate. He sent an email. 3 days later, he received a response with an address and a time. No phone consultation, no intake form. Just, come prepared to be uncomfortable. Chapter 2, The Dojo of the Mind. The following Tuesday, David found himself in a converted warehouse in an industrial part of the city. The space was minimal: bamboo floors, white walls, a low wooden table, and floor cushions. It didn't look like an office. It looked like a dojo. Kenji entered silently. He was perhaps 55, with silver streaking his black hair, wearing simple black clothing. His presence was unusual, not commanding in the Western sense, but settled, like a mountain that doesn't need to prove it's there. "Sit," Kenji said, gesturing to a cushion across from him. David sat, ready with his practiced explanation of his problem. "I struggle with speaking up in meetings. I have social anxiety that's holding back my career. I need to build confidence and..." Kenji raised a hand. "Stop. You're telling me the story you've been telling yourself. I'm not interested in that story. Tell me this instead. What is the voice saying right now? In this moment, what is it telling you?" David paused, turned his attention inward. "It's saying that I'm wasting your time, that my problem is too small, that you're going to think I'm weak for not being able to handle something so basic." "Good. You can hear it. Now tell me, do you believe that voice is telling you the truth?" I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes no." Kenji nodded slowly. "That uncertainty is the problem. You're in a war where you don't know which side you're on. The voice says one thing, another part of you says something else, and you're paralyzed between them. Yes? This is what we call in Japanese philosophy kokoro no senso, the war of the heart. And here's what no one has told you: you cannot win this war by defeating the voice. You cannot win by being more confident than your doubt. You cannot win by positive thinking or affirmations or any of the Western approaches you've tried." David felt something sink in his chest. "Then how do I win?" Kenji smiled, a subtle upturning at the corners of his mouth. "You don't. You change the nature of the war itself. I'm going to teach you 5 principles that warriors and monks have used for centuries. Not to eliminate self-doubt, but to transform it into your greatest weapon. Are you ready?" "I think so." "Think so is doubt speaking. Yes or no?" "Good. Then we begin with Mushin, the mind of no mind." Chapter 3, Mushin, the mind of no mind. Kenji stood and walked to a scroll hanging on the wall. It showed a circle drawn in one fluid brushstroke, and in so. In the warrior tradition of Japan, there's a state called Mushin. It translates to no mind or mind without mind. Westerners misunderstand this. They think it means emptying your mind, having no thoughts. That's impossible and not the point. He turned back to David. Mushin means not attaching to your thoughts. The thoughts come doubt, fear, excitement, confidence, but you don't grab onto them. You don't argue with them. You don't try to change them. You simply observe them passing through, like clouds across the sky. But the voice of self-doubt feels so real, so convincing. Of course it does. That's its job. Your brain evolved to identify threats and keep you safe. 10,000 years ago, when standing out from the tribe could mean death, that voice kept your ancestors alive. But you're not living in that world anymore. The voice is still doing its job, but it's solving the wrong problem. Kenji returned to his cushion. Here's what I want you to understand. Self-doubt is not your enemy. It's a misguided protector. It's trying to save you from the pain of failure, judgment, and rejection. It genuinely believes it's helping you. This reframed everything David thought he knew. So I shouldn't try to get rid of it. You cannot get rid of it. Any attempt to silence it makes it louder. This is the paradox. The more you fight self-doubt, the more energy you give it. But when you acknowledge it without attachment, when you practice Mushin, something remarkable happens. The voice loses its power. How do I do that? How do I not attach? Practice, starting now. Kenji shifted forward slightly. I want you to speak to me about your work. Describe what you do, what you're working on. And as the voice of doubt arises, and it will, I want you to simply notice it without obeying it. Speak anyway. David felt his stomach tighten. I work on back-end architecture. I design systems that handle data processing for. The voice started immediately. This is boring. He doesn't care. You sound technical and boring. David stopped. What happened? Kenji asked. The voice said I was being boring. Good. You noticed it. Now, did you verify whether that's true? Did you check with me if I was bored? So you took a thought as bored and treated it as fact. You attached to it. Try again. This time, when the voice speaks, mentally note it, thought or doubt speaking, then continue anyway. David tried again. I design systems that handle large-scale data processing. The voice arose. He's not impressed. David mentally noted, doubt speaking. He continued, right now, I'm working on optimizing our pipeline to reduce latency by. Stop, Kenji interrupted. How do you feel right now? Anxious, but also. I kept speaking even though the voice was there. Exactly. This is Mushin. The voice didn't disappear. You didn't believe it into silence. You simply didn't let it control your actions. The thought arose, you observed it, and you acted according to your intention, not your fear. Over the next 30 minutes, Kenji had David practice this again and again. Speak, notice the doubt, continue speaking. Each time, the gap between the voice and his action grew slightly wider. This week, Kenji said as the session ended, I want you to practice this everywhere. Not in meetings yet, that's too advanced. Start smaller. The coffee shop when you order. With your wife when you share an opinion. With a colleague in a one-on-one. Notice the voice, name it as doubt speaking, and act anyway. We meet again in 1 week. Chapter 4, Fudoshin Immovable Mind. The week was harder than David expected. At the coffee shop, when he wanted to ask them to remake his drink because it was wrong, the voice said, don't be difficult. Just accept it. He noticed it doubt speaking and asked anyway. The barista smiled and remade it without hesitation. With his wife, when she asked what movie he wanted to watch, instead of his usual whatever you want, he noticed the voice, she'll think you're being controlling, and said, Actually, I'd really like to watch that documentary I mentioned. She said, great choice. I was hoping you'd pick something. Small moments. But each one proved the voice was a liar. At the next session, he told Kenji about his week. Kenji nodded approvingly. You're beginning to see that self-doubt doesn't predict reality. It just predicts your fear of reality. Now we add the second principle, Fudoshin. What does that mean? Immovable mind. In the samurai tradition, Fudoshin referred to a mental state that cannot be disturbed by external events. No matter what happens, success or failure, praise or criticism, your center remains stable. That sounds impossible. Not impossible. Necessary. Let me show you why. Kenji pulled out his phone and set a timer. I'm going to ask you to do something, and you'll feel the voice of doubt intensely. I want you to talk for 2 minutes straight about why you deserve to be promoted. No stopping, no qualifications, no humility. Make the case for yourself. David's heart rate spiked immediately. I can't. I mean, I don't think I. See, the voice is already rising. This is exactly why you need Fudoshin. Your worth isn't dependent on whether you can perfectly articulate it in this moment. Your value isn't diminished because self-doubt arises when you state it. These are separate things. So speak. David started, haltingly at first. I deserve to be promoted because my code is clean and my solutions work. The voice screamed, arrogant, boastful. They'll hate you. But something different happened this time. Instead of stopping, David felt something solid beneath the doubt. A truth that existed whether or not he felt confident in that moment. He continued, I solve problems that others can't solve. I've saved the company thousands of hours by optimizing our systems. My colleagues come to me because they trust my expertise. The 2 minutes ended. David was sweating, but he'd done it. How do you feel? Kenji asked. Terrified. Like I just said something terrible. But did you say anything untrue? Then the terror is just a feeling. Feelings aren't facts. This is Fudoshin, knowing that your center, your worth, your truth exists, independent of emotional weather. The doubt is like a storm passing through the sky. The sky remains. Kenji leaned back. In Western culture, you're taught that you must feel confident before acting confidently. This is backwards. Fudoshin teaches that you act from your center regardless of what you feel. The feeling follows the action, not the other way around. But isn't that being inauthentic? Acting one way when you feel another. No. Your doubt is not your authentic self. Your doubt is a protective mechanism. Your authentic self is the one who took this job, who learned to code, who solves complex problems, who cares enough about growth to sit here with me. That self exists beneath the doubt. Fudoshin means acting from that deeper truth. David sat with this. For years, he'd waited to feel brave before acting brave. He'd waited to feel confident before speaking confidently. And in that waiting, he'd given all his power to the voice. This week, Kenji said, you're going to practice immovability. Pick one meeting, just one, and decide before you enter that room. I will speak once with substance, regardless of what I feel. Not 10 times. Not perfectly. Just once. Decide it in advance. And when the moment comes, act from your decision, not your emotion. Chapter 5. Sanshin Remaining Mind. David chose a team stand-up meeting. Before it started, he made his decision. I will offer one substantial contribution today. When the moment came when his manager asked if anyone had concerns about the timeline, the voice rose immediately. Stay quiet. Someone else will say it better. But David had already decided. He spoke. I think we're underestimating the integration phase by about a week. Based on similar projects, we should add buffer time. Silence. Then his manager nodded. That's a good point, David. Let's adjust the timeline. That was it. The world didn't end. No one left. His contribution was accepted as valuable because it was valuable. At his session with Kenji, David was almost giddy. I did it. I spoke up and nothing bad happened. Kenji held up a hand. Careful. This is where most people lose their progress. They have one success and think they've conquered doubt forever. Then it comes back and they're devastated. This is why we need the third principle, sanction. What's that? Remaining mind. Sustained awareness. In martial arts, sanction refers to the state of alertness after a technique is completed. The fight isn't over just because you struck once. You remain aware, present, ready. Kenji stood and moved to the center of the room. Self-doubt is not an enemy you defeat once. It's a companion for life. Some days it will whisper, some days it will scream. Sanction means you don't declare victory and drop your guard. You maintain awareness that the voice will return, and when it does, you're ready. That sounds exhausting. Only if you frame it as a battle. But what if sanction means simply staying awake? Not fighting the doubt, just remaining aware that it's a voice, not the voice of truth. It's like being aware of the weather without being controlled by it. Over the next weeks, David learned what Kenji meant. He had a terrible meeting where he stumbled over his words. The voice said, "See, you're not cut out for this." But instead of collapsing into shame, he practiced sanction, remaining aware that one bad moment didn't erase his progress. He noted doubt speaking after a setback. And the next day, he tried again. He also had a great presentation where his manager praised his clarity. The voice immediately said, "That was luck. Next time you'll fail." Sanction meant recognizing this pattern, doubt trying to diminish success before he could build on it. The voice has two primary tactics, Kenji explained during their session. After failure, it says, "See, you're not capable." After success, it says, "That was an accident. Don't get comfortable." Both are designed to keep you playing small. Sanction means watching these patterns and not being fooled by them. David realized he'd spent decades letting one bad experience define him while dismissing hundreds of good ones. His confirmation bias worked in favor of his doubt. This week, Kenji said, "I want you to keep a sanction journal. Every time self-doubt speaks, whether after perceived failure or success, write down exactly what it says. Don't argue with it. Just record it. Let's see the patterns." Chapter 6, Mushin Beginner's Mind. By week 8, David's journal revealed clear patterns. The voice always said some variation of, "You'll fail. People will judge you. You're not enough." Same script, different contexts. Seeing it written out stripped it of its mystical power. It was just a broken record playing the same few tracks. But something else was happening. David was improving. His manager had noticed his increased participation. Colleagues had started asking his opinion more directly. His wife said he seemed more present. Yet every morning, he still felt the heavy weight of self-doubt. "I don't understand," he told Kenji. "I've made real progress. Why does the voice still feel so strong sometimes?" Because you're still expecting it to disappear. You're still treating its presence as evidence that you're not truly changing. This is where we need Mushin Beginner's Mind. Beginner's Mind. In Zen Buddhism, Shoshin refers to having an attitude of openness, eagerness, and lack of preconceptions, even when studying something advanced. The beginner's mind sees everything fresh, without the burden of expertise or expectation. Kenji poured tea for both of them. You're expecting mastery over self-doubt. You think there will come a day when you feel completely confident, when the voice is silent, when you speak without any internal resistance. This expectation itself creates suffering. So I should accept that I'll always struggle. No. You should accept that growth doesn't mean the absence of doubt. It means a different relationship with doubt. The master and the beginner both hear the voice. The difference is the master knows it's just a voice. He sipped his tea. Shoshin means approaching each moment fresh. Not carrying yesterday's doubt into today. Not assuming that because the voice was loud yesterday, it will be loud today. Not assuming that because you felt confident last week, you've arrived. Every moment is new. David felt something release in his chest. He'd been judging himself for still feeling doubt, treating it as failure. But what if the doubt's presence was the problem? What if his judgment of the doubt was the problem? Let me give you a practice, Kenji said. Before important moments, meetings, presentations, difficult conversations, I want you to say to yourself, I am a beginner at this specific moment. I don't know how this will go. The doubt is here, and that's okay. Let's see what happens. Won't that make me more anxious? No. Anxiety comes from demanding certainty in uncertain situations. Shoshin accepts uncertainty as the natural state. When you stop demanding that doubt be absent before you act, you stop creating suffering for yourself. David practiced this before his next major presentation, a quarterly review in front of senior leadership. Usually, he'd spend days rehearsing obsessively, trying to eliminate any possibility of failure. This time, he prepared well but approached it with Shoshin. I'm a beginner at this exact presentation. I don't know how it will go. Let's find out. The presentation went well, but there was a moment when a VP asked a question David couldn't answer. Normally, this would have confirmed his worst fears. But with Shoshin, he simply said, That's a great question. I don't have that data with me, but I'll get it to you by end of day. The VP nodded. Perfect. Beginner's mind had allowed him to be human, to not have all the answers, and the sky didn't fall. Chapter 7. Kaizen of the Spirit. 6 months into his work with Kenji, David had been promoted to senior engineer. Not because he'd become a different person, but because he'd stopped hiding who he already was. The voice still came, but it no longer controlled him. In their session, Kenji introduced the final principle. Everything we've learned builds to this, Kaizen of the Spirit. I thought Kaizen was about continuous improvement in business. The principle is the same, but we're applying it to inner life. Kaizen means small, continuous improvement. Most people try to transform themselves overnight to go from self-doubting to supremely confident in a weekend workshop. This never works because change that dramatic cannot be integrated. The nervous system rejects it. Kenji drew a gentle upward slope on paper. But if you improve your relationship with self-doubt by just 1% each day, if you practice Mushin 1% better, Fudoshin 1% stronger, Sanshin 1% more consistently, over time, these small improvements compound into complete transformation. So this is never finished. Life is never finished. Growth is never finished. The voice of self-doubt will evolve as you evolve. You'll face new challenges that trigger new doubts. But each time, you'll have these principles. Kaizen of the Spirit means you're always working with your inner life, always refining, always growing. David understood now why Kenji's space looked like a dojo. This wasn't therapy to fix something broken. This was training for a warrior, of the mind, ongoing, disciplined, and without end. "Let me tell you something crucial," Kenji said, his voice taking on a weight it hadn't before. "Self-doubt is not your flaw. It's your edge." "What do you mean?" "The people who never doubt themselves. They're dangerous. They make terrible mistakes with full confidence. They hurt others without questioning themselves. They're rigid, brittle, unable to adapt." Kenji leaned forward. "But you? You question yourself. You examine your actions. You're aware of your impact on others. This sensitivity, this self-awareness, it's not weakness. It's wisdom trying to emerge. The problem was never the doubt itself. It was that you believed the doubt without questioning it." David felt tears rising. For decades, he'd seen his self-doubt as his greatest shame. But what if it was actually a superpower he'd been using against himself? "People with self-doubt have a gift," Kenji continued. "When they learn to work with it instead of being paralyzed by it, they become the most conscious, thoughtful, impactful leaders. Because they consider consequences. They listen to others. They stay humble while still acting powerfully. This is the warrior's path to have strength and gentleness, confidence and humility, action and reflection. So I'm not trying to become someone who never doubts. No, you're becoming someone who doubts wisely, who questions themselves productively, who uses doubt as information, not instruction. The voice says you might fail, and instead of stopping, you think, yes, I might. Let me prepare well and try anyway. That's wisdom." Chapter 8. The Test. Kenji set up what he called David's final test. David would co-lead a presentation to the board of directors about a major technical initiative. Not just contribute, co-lead. The voice would have maximum ammunition. For weeks leading up to it, David practiced all 5 principles. When doubt arose, you're going to embarrass yourself in front of the entire board. He practiced Mushin, that's doubt speaking. He practiced Fudoshin, acting from his center, not his fear. He practiced Sanshin, remaining aware that one moment wouldn't define him. He practiced Shoshin, approaching the presentation with beginner's mind. And he practiced Kaizen, improving his preparation 1% each day. The morning of the presentation, the voice was loud. "This is it. This is where everyone sees your fraud." David sat in his car before going in. He spoke aloud to the voice. "Thank you for trying to protect me. I know you think this is dangerous. But I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to be okay." The presentation wasn't perfect. David stumbled over one section. A board member asked a challenging question that made him pause. But he stayed present. He used Mushin to observe the doubt without obeying it. He used Fudoshin to remain centered when uncertain. He used Sanshin to stay aware and adaptable. He used Shoshin to approach each question fresh. And he used Kaizen to take what he learned for next time. After the presentation, the CEO pulled him aside. "David, that was excellent work. We need more people who think as clearly as you do. Let's talk about your trajectory here." But the real victory wasn't the CEO words. It was what David felt inside. Not confidence that would come and go, but something deeper. Settledness. He'd faced his fear and proven that he could act despite it. The voice didn't need to be silent for him to be powerful. Chapter 9. The Warrior Returns. A year after starting with Kenji, David's life looked completely different. He'd been promoted to technical director. He led meetings regularly. He'd given keynote presentations at conferences. His marriage had deepened because he'd stopped hiding in silence. But the transformation wasn't just external. Internally, his relationship with self-doubt had fundamentally shifted. The voice still came before big presentations, before difficult conversations, before moments of visibility. But now, it was like background noise. Present, but not in control. His final session with Kenji was different from all the others. They sat in silence for several minutes before Kenji spoke. "You came to me believing self-doubt was your enemy. What do you believe now?" David considered. "I believe it's a signal. Like pain in the body. It tells me something matters, that I care, that I'm at an edge of growth. But it doesn't tell me the truth about my capabilities." Kenji nodded. "And when it arises now, what do you do?" "I notice it. I thank it for trying to protect me. And then I act according to my values, not my fears." Then you understand. The warrior's mind isn't fearless. It's fear-aware. The doubt never disappears. But you've learned to be bigger than the doubt. Kenji stood and walked to a cabinet. He removed a small wrapped package and handed it to David. Inside was a smooth black stone with a single word carved into it in Japanese characters. "Fudoshin," Kenji said. "Immovable mind. Keep this where you'll see it. Not to remind you to be strong, but to remind you that your center exists beneath the noise. Always." David held the stone, feeling its weight. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You did the work. I just showed you the path." Chapter 10, The Legacy. 2 years later, David was leading a technical team of 15 engineers. But that's not the part that mattered most. What mattered was that he'd become a leader who created psychological safety, who made it okay for his team to be uncertain, to ask questions, to admit when they didn't know. One of his engineers, a young woman named Maria, came to his office one day. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." How did you get so confident? I watch you in meetings and you seem so sure of yourself." David laughed. "Maria, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I'm not confident. At least not in the way you think." "What do you mean?" "I mean before every big meeting, every presentation, every difficult conversation, I still hear a voice telling me I'm going to fail, that people will see through me, that I'm not qualified." "That voice hasn't gone away." Maria looked confused. "Then how do you do it?" "I learned that the voice doesn't have to be gone for me to act. I learned principles from Japanese philosophy Mushin, Fudoshin, Sanshin, Shoshin, Kaizen that taught me to work with the doubt, not against it. The doubt still rises, but I don't obey it anymore." Could you teach me?" David smiled. "I can share what I learned. But you'll have to do the work yourself. It starts with one thing, noticing the voice of doubt without believing it. Just noticing it and acting anyway." Over the following months, David worked with Maria the way Kenji had worked with him. He watched her transform from someone who never spoke in meetings to someone who brought thoughtful perspectives. Not because her doubt disappeared, but because she learned to move through it. And that's when David understood the real gift. This wasn't just about him. When you transform your relationship with self-doubt, you give permission to everyone around you to do the same. You show that it's possible to be uncertain and still act. To be afraid and still try. To doubt yourself and still lead. Epilogue. Your turn. "So now I'm going to ask you the same question Kenji asked David in their first session. What is the voice saying right now? As you've watched this video, as you've heard David's story, What has your doubt whispered to you? Maybe it said, "This wouldn't work for me. My situation is different." Maybe it said, "I could never be that disciplined." Maybe it said, "I'm too broken, too anxious, too far gone." Whatever it said, I want you to recognize something. That's just the voice doing its job. Protecting you. Keeping you safe. Trying to save you from the risk of trying and failing. But here's what the voice doesn't tell you. The cost of safety is your life unlived. Every dream you didn't pursue. Every relationship you didn't risk. Every opportunity you passed because you weren't ready. That cost adds up over decades until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've spent your entire life protecting yourself from living. The 5 principles I've shared aren't magic. They're practices. And practices require practice. Mushin, observing your thoughts without being controlled by them. Fudoshin, acting from your center regardless of emotional weather. Zanshin, maintaining awareness that doubt will return and staying ready. Mushin, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, without the burden of past failures. Kaizen, improving your relationship with doubt by 1% each day. You don't need all 5 at once. You just need to start with 1. Today, practice Mushin. Notice when self-doubt speaks. Don't argue with it. Don't try to replace it with positive thoughts. Just notice it and name it. That's doubt speaking. Then act anyway. Not because you feel confident, but because your life is waiting on the other side of that voice. I want you to comment below with one thing you've been avoiding because of self-doubt. Name it. Make it real. Because when you speak your fear publicly, you've already begun to strip it of its power. And remember, the warrior's path isn't about never feeling doubt. It's about being bigger than your doubt. The voice will always be there. But you can learn to be the sky, not the clouds passing through. Your life is waiting. Stop letting the voice in your head write the story of what's possible. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'll see you in the next one. Now go. The world needs what only you can offer, and it's tired of waiting.